Perspectives, different views, one voice.
You're just punishing other people, man. Welcome to the LDN Perspective podcast. My name is Kojo, and I'm with my friends
Cam,
Mo, Ali,
Edward.
Oh, jeez, I didn't put you in the friend category.
Thank you.
No, we do have a special guest with us, Edward, who's with us to discuss this specific conversation. But just before we do that, though, how's your week been? Is there anything that's kind of that you like to share? Actually, one thing to share is that someone just got shot. Everyone needs to stop getting shot. Shot.
Well, we don't have details yet. So apparently it's classed as terrorism related again. So God knows, we're expecting someone of Asian or black. Well, if it was black,
is that the assumption? Just because it's
just been
terrorism,
isn't it? No, but you know, if
it was gang,
media,
then what would you assume?
You would assume that the media would be black, and if it's terrorist related,
because it's like the man that the van. You know, there was this guy, this
London
white
Bridge?
this white guy that
Finsbury Park.
right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
He was in charge under the Terrorism Act, was he?
I don't know.
No,
That's why we don't remember.
Yeah.
Anyway,
because at that point they did say we have to call it terrorism, but anything after that, we're not too sure what happened. So yeah, you're right.
anyway.
Perspectives, different views, one voice.
Cool. So we just go into a conversation, something that we've been having on other platforms for a while. And this conversation is around accountability in the black communities, right? Would you say that?
Yeah.
And so I guess...
As well as individuals as well.
I guess when we say that accountability,
but
normally it starts with, we say community, but then if the individual takes account of their actions, then that could then spread to the wider community. But I guess just before we go into this, though, because you wanted to discuss this, Edward, when you say accountability, what is your thinking behind using the word accountability?
So I guess this topic stemmed from a lot of the time, particularly because what I do a lot is I go on social media and I just see what is happening in terms of just keeping my ears to the ground in the community, whether it's overseas, so you've got Black Americas, or the UK black community. And one thing that really is sort of grated on me over the last few months is how hypersensitive we can be to a lot of, maybe if it's like, for example, the recent outrages around certain fashion designers and their portrayal of having like a black, like, I don't know if you guys remember the little kid and it had like the cheek is like
the H&M,
the coolest monkey in H&M and various other things. And it was like, okay, I can understand our frustration and our anger towards that, but actually, what do we do as a community to ensure that we don't play on that victim mentality for a very long time? Because don't get me wrong, we have the right to complain and be outraged, but when do we start taking accountability for the actions to ensure that things like this don't happen in future? Whether it's, even if it's starting our own brand or actually trying to get on board with these luxury brands and making sure that actually you can't go out and offend us, and they would think twice to doing it. Because you can imagine if, for example, the Jewish community, someone was to put a swastika on some sort of Jewish I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Whether it's a clothing or some sort of flag, the outrage immediately that will come, because they knew already from the get-go that we can't be doing this anyway. So it's about actually, if we're sort of if we're accountable for our own actions and within the community, then people outside would be like, you know what, we can't just go around offending.
Can I touch on that?
Sure.
I heard what you're saying about accountability and the black or the outrage of the H&M outbursts. However, the example you gave within the Jewish own certain things within this world. We all know that. So if that happens, we will know the consequences of what is happening. However, in the black community or in the black outrage out of it, we do not own certain things. So when things like this is happening, we are most likely to get attacked for it to happen, in a sense, in a way where... But do you understand my drift, what I'm getting at?
Yeah, of course.
So that's the reason why these certain things happens. Because, first of all, is respect. They don't have a respect for us. We seem to not to own or our ownership to anything that we do. And then on top of that, when it happens, it will be just died off in one time, or it just hypes about it in a few weeks or few days, should I say, maybe a few hours. Then the next month or the next few months, we're back at it again, doing the same thing like as if it was just, it never happened. But you understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, Ali. Like, I understand that certain aspects of the community in terms of ownership and being able to drive the change, but because I really want to try and articulate this very well. So the issue with that is, when do we start taking accountability in terms of, okay, we don't own anything, like just jumping on the example you've brought forward. So what are we going to do about it? Because we can't keep they can't keep creating more outrages, and all we're doing is just being outrage. Eventually, we have to be like, do you know what? Enough is enough. Forget about trying to get validation from outside. Let's try and internalize what the issue is that we have as a community, and let's try and solve that. And therefore, meaning that each individual in that community will have to take accountability for whatever action they have, and from there, I don't know.
Okay, so
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, it's a wider topic.
So Finn, So first of all, in the black community, is there a lack of accountability in the black community?
I think so.
Okay, in what sense? What are we not being accountable for?
For our own action.
Like
when things do happen, we are not saying, okay, we need to work on it or anything like that.
So when you say things do happen, because I guess from what you're saying, so you could go back to the interview. There was one interview that Kanye West had, right, on TMZ, right? And you could understand what Kanye West was trying to say and how that came out. I guess what Kanye West was trying to say is that, yes, we've gone through a period of hardship and slavery and all those kind of stuff, but he was more talking about the state of mind that we're currently in regards to still being enslaved, and that is a choice now, which is not how he kind of articulated it, if you get what I mean. So when and it's funny that we always talk about accountability in the black community, whatever, but I would like our listeners to understand, what examples are we using here as black people not being accountable? First of all, let's try to understand that before we build up on this conversation.
Okay.
What are we not being accountable for?
Okay, so I'm going to try and stay away from the US sort of thing because we're in the UK. So, for example, what is going on right now in terms of our young youths and kids, we know that. So ignoring what the media is saying, well, black on black, I don't agree with those terms. But ultimately, as a community, we do have a problem. And it's understanding that actually, as a community, we need to take ownership of that. I'm not saying 100% ownership, but we need to take some sort of ownership on that and have some accountability as to actually, there is something with our community. We need to sort of understand what is going on and try to resolve that, rather than screaming that, external, it's the people externally, they're not listening, or they're not certain things that they've taken away from us. Like, I understand that funding in terms of cuts to youth centres and kids where they can go and stuff, but ultimately we need to still be accountable for the kids that we put out there. So, parents understanding where are your children are at after a certain time, or actually, do you know the parents of some of the children that your kids hang around with? And it's just having that sense of community together, because I'm sure if it was in another community where something like this was happening, there would be some sort of action being implemented one way or another, whether it's within their own community to try and solve that issue, or the community themselves going out there together and getting someone externally, whether it's... I'm trying to articulate very well.
I get what you're saying, and I know another concern that I've heard before is in regards to the whole teaching of your children as well in the black community.
Yes.
A lot of them might be outraged at how the schools are teaching their kids. But then when their kids get home, what do you actually do for your child's education? Do you read with them extra? Do you give them that extra support or background into certain things? Or are you 100% giving it to someone else and then being angry at what they're teaching your kids? But you're allowing them and you're giving them the power to do that.
That's a good example.
So, yeah, I get that what you mean in the whole accountability side, as in what can we do ourselves to affect that aspect maybe of our kids.
Yeah.
And then in general, let's say, back to the H&M thing that you mentioned earlier about the abuse and the image that came out from their advertising. I would like to know how many of us actually stopped shopping at H&M. I know my wife, she took that stance straight away. She was someone that ordered from them all the time. Everything, she cut it off and hasn't used them ever since. That's not necessarily saying throw away all your H&M clothes that you've got now, but maybe going forward, you're no longer putting any of your money towards that business. And that's another aspect in terms of accountability. You can be outraged about that, but are you just shouting about your disconsent?
But then another part, do you want to come? Another part of when you're looking at this accountability, because you could look at accountability, you could look at knife crime, you could look at some of the issues that we kind of have within our communities. And then you could have someone that will actually come on this platform to say, yes, I am doing something about it. I do protest. I go on this campaign, these marches or whatever not. And I guess the question is, how many people are actually doing that? If you get what I mean, right? And I guess when you're also looking at accountability, of course it starts with that individual, right? But then I think for our generation, it's very interesting to understand within our communities, what are we actually doing? Because the one thing that I keep saying to people when people talk about knife crime and all those kind of stuff is that, as you mentioned, forget the external factors. Let's look at the internal factors. Let's look at yourself. So if we just put knife crime or whatever that issue is, what are you personally doing to buck this trend? What are you giving back to that community, right? So I think when we're having this conversation, because we're not going to have this Jesus, this Malcolm X, someone just come and unify all of us, because that's what everyone is waiting for. The dawn of this person just rising and bringing black people together. And I'm saying that could happen in whatever years that's meant to be happening. Now that we're here, what are we individually doing about that? I guess would be the next thing that I'll ask to you guys. Because where does it start? Because for me, on one hand, you say black people, black people, black people. Are you not black? Do you not have power? Look at that. You see the way the African accent came out. Are you not black?
No, it's true. It starts with the individual.
Do you not have power to change stuff? Because we're always thinking that we need this big bang thing to have. But anyone could have an idea. And the collective, if people feel within those communities there are issues there, the collective will generally, you bring people together around an idea. So what are we doing about this issue?
You know what? Let me add something into this. What we guys are talking about this topic. We black has gone through a lot within the slavery, and we've moved forward, and we're trying to progress and be where we are at this period of time. I can speak for probably the African generation. My parents are the first generation. I'm the second generation. And then my children to be, or probably to be the third generation, and so on. I appreciate the fact that my mom has brought me here, because I wasn't born here. This is just accountability I'm going to get into. I appreciate the fact that my mom has brought me here when I was young, and I wasn't born here, and now I'm here. I've looked into the timeline and the aspect of how my mom has been struggled as being a single parent. And for her understanding is to raise me well, do what I need to do for me to be where I am now. I never took the advantage to disown her or not, or trying to be in a wrong line, because I know the consequences, what's going to happen, because she had 2 jobs and trying to be there for us, for me and my sibling. Moving forward now, I'm a grown man. I've married and having kids and so on, and being more in that understanding of it. When I look back, I could have said, oh, my mom wasn't there for me or whatsoever. so therefore I'm going to misbehave and do what I need to do. No. As a man now, when I'm moving forward within my timeline, within my family that I'm having now, I should say to myself, I appreciate and I'm happy what my mom has done for me. So the accountability now I'm trying to be owned for is the mistakes that my mom has made. I would not allow that to happen with my family. So therefore, anything that is going to I know it's going to affect me personally and my family, I'm not going to allow it and tolerate it and let that inbred in within myself. So the question is, the understanding of the accountability is, for example, making sure that I do not take my priority for work. I don't take priority as much as work. I take my family to be priority. Second of all, I have to make sure that I save for my children that are coming in my life. So when they get to my age where I am now, there will be indecency in the near future. I can give them heritage. I can make sure that when they get into a university in a near time, they will have a tangible amount or income to say, this is what my family or my parents has done for me. This is the accountability. And then on the top of that, I'll make sure that the people that I know, my surrounding, that my children are ready and for the future. So we can all say all of this and that, but we do have a huge issue within ourselves, because personally I think in a black community or in a black, it's just that we are blaming. We need to stop all of that and move forward. And moving forward is helping in among ourselves. For example, you've got a decent job, gold job. I'll make sure that I communicate with you in a way to make sure that if anything, I help out. Same way as Edward, same way as Mo, same way I can. This is our generation. We work within that. I think the accountability is in that kind of level where we shouldn't stop. We stop blaming and see our problems individually and understand it and trying to say, okay, this is what we're going to do, but our generation to come, for them not to be in that situation. That's what I think.
I'm a bit ambivalent about the whole topic of accountability because are we saying that some of the problems that arise within the black community, we need to hold ourselves responsible for them? Is that what we're saying?
No.
Being accountable and responsible are two
different.
Okay,
yeah.
So right, okay.
Can you clarify the difference in the two?
So accountable is as in having some kind of self-reflection on what you could be doing in relation to this situation. Responsible is actually saying you've had some direct impact to how this situation has occurred.
But I feel like,
it's a thin line between the two. It's a very
thin line.
Very
makes you kind of responsible. That's how I kind of feel. Because if you're not being accountable regarding reflecting to see what you can actually give back to that specific issue, then when that issue is still going on, then you are a bit responsible.
Because if you draw back,
still going on.
If we draw back to what we're saying, you know, kids are being taught in school, and there may be particular topics that you don't agree with, or you feel as though your children need to have more insight into other topics, then you're saying there has to be a level of accountability in terms of us not teaching our kids those topics in the household, but then that falls on our responsibility to do so.
Yes.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, you have to do it though.
Yeah.
So there's two aspects of what you're saying, as in what the school is teaching your kids.
Yeah.
There's the accountability side of, are we approaching the school governors or something in terms of what sort of curriculum is being in place for our kids? Or are we talking in terms of, because I'm not teaching my kids this specific topic, or I don't like the way that topic is being taught in the school, I can add my insertion into it when my child comes home or is with me. So there's two different things.
So it kind of does border on the responsibility sort of concept of it all, because you have to take some form of responsibility to say, okay, if this is happening in the school, then I need to take take this burden upon myself to ensure that my kids are taught these things in the household. So
I agree, because go on.
Yeah, so that's a personal responsibility, and then there's a community responsibility.
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean? Yeah, you can take the personal responsibility in terms of teaching your child, but then do you feel this could be another problem for other young kids like yours that may not have that adult in their life or that influential person to take that responsibility. So how could you help the community?
Yeah, so this is the stuff. When you're looking at your circle of control, so you have your inner circle. This is stuff that you directly have control over, yeah? And then you have the outer kind of layer, which could be stuff like the school, speaking to governors. And I guess in regards to our community and talking about crime specifically, then you're looking at the police. How do police actually communicate with these communities? You're looking at all this stuff that they're talking about, single mothers, absent fathers, all these kind of stuff to see. You're even looking at the school exclusion rates and what happens after someone gets excluded, the kind of trajectory, what happens from exclusion to the cell. Like what happens from that? Because when you start drawing those parallels, you'll find that there is a lot of young youths that the minute that they're excluded, they might end up in these kind of stuff as well. Mm-hmm. So those are stuff that's outside your kind of circle of control, because you cannot directly control that, but you can influence that. Right? You could influence that. Yeah. So when we talk about accountability, one of it is that outside layer, are you actually actively trying to influence things to change? And then when we look at that inside part, are you speaking to your children? Like if you do have a community or a neighbor that you actually talk to, are you actually friends with your neighbor? Because the problem that you have is that your neighbor has a child that's around your age, your child's age, but you don't have any form of relationship with your neighbor. Mm-hmm. So when those two children see each other on the road, they don't know each other. There's nothing that's drawing them together. And those kind of stuff as well. So that comes with that sense of community, because that the minute that you start working on your inner circle, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. So you need to focus on your inner circle and how can that actually, you could have more influence in that inner circle, because that then goes into your kind of art. Am I making sense here?
Yeah,
I mean, in
perspectives, different views, one voice.
In terms of, say, influence, so an example I would use is probably, say, like the hair care industry. So I guess a lot of products within that industry are sold to us in shops that are run by Asians, and so there's an issue about them selling, our own hair products to ourselves, where by that should be us. We know better. We know about the care for our hair better than any other sort of culture, but yet we're buying these products from people that are not necessarily part of that culture. And I have come across people who have taken it upon themselves to try and break into that industry, to try and sell, it could be other women selling hair or selling other products. And, sometimes it can be difficult to get themselves, off the ground, because their prices might very well exceed what the prices are in those shops. And although they're trying to impose some influence in trying to direct change, that can be extremely difficult, because at the same time, when it comes to that, it's all about, cost, and people will just go for what's cheaper. But then you do have conversations amongst people who do complain about, these people selling these products to us. I mean, I had a conversation with one person and they gave me a parable, and this was someone from America, and he was speaking to me about a white guy who was going to Ghana and buying shea butter and selling it at wholesale to to companies in America. And, I asked him, I said, how do you feel about that? And he said, he feels, he does feel a bit of a way, but he gave me an example. He said, he gave me a story, and I'll summarize the story. He said there was an example of a black guy trying to get a bus, and he missed it. He missed the bus. And he was so angry and pissed off that he missed the bus. So he started having a conversation with someone else at the bus stop and started kicking off about it. And they were just having a conversation about missing the bus. And he had to wait 45 minutes for the next one. And whilst he was waiting for a bus, there was a white woman who came in a yoga sort of type outfit, had her AirPods on. And whilst he was having a conversation with this other guy, another bus came, and this white girl jumps on the bus. And bus drives off, and they see the bus go off, and then they see the girl on the bus, and they just start complaining, saying it's her fault we missed the bus, And this guy said to me, he sees the bus as opportunity. All that girl saw was an opportunity to jump on the bus, and these guys failed to see it. And he likened that to some certain scenarios within the black community about there are cases of opportunity to direct change and influence certain conventions within the community, but we failed to see the opportunity in that.
I would like to.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was wanting to say. That's why I used the phrase, we need to stop moaning and start being accountable for our action. Mm-hmm. You've seen that. That's a perfect example. What do we do about it? We just sit there and moan and moan and moan.
Okay. Now, so just added to that. So just looking at that same example again, and I'm not using the same outcome regarding the example, but the example is that the buses are running, by the account, it seems that the buses are running every 45 minutes, right? So you missed that first bus. Yeah, and this is how I feel like black people do. They miss that first bus. They complain. They sit there with other black people sitting at the bus stop, complain. They wait for that next bus and jump on that next bus. And they wake up tomorrow and they do the same shit.
Exactly.
Yeah? What you should be doing after you're complaining, go to the bus company to say, we use this route. How come this route is only running 45 minutes? Do you know what happened to me last time? No one does anything about it.
No.
So for me, I guess just using the example, and the next case of this conversation is that how come, and this is me personally, how come I feel like we just get stuck in this situation of we're raising relevant issues within our community, but it just always sounds as if we are just raising these issues and there isn't that next step. How do we get to that next step? Or why? How come there isn't that next step? Or is there a next step, but I'm not seeing it? Like,
I think he's scared. I think he's scared. It's a scaremongery. I think what I understand is like I think we are scared to move. I don't know. I don't want to make it sound like as if I'm just attacking my own race, because I'm not. Because I'm black myself. I feel like when there's an issue, we want to erase it. But then the downline to it, we are scared of rejection. We're scared of who we're going to complain it to. We're scared of the environment. We're scared of we feel like we're going to lose quite a lot of asset into what we're doing. So, perfect example, the chimpanzee, the H&M. We feel like if we go to the media or we go to H&M, because we know H&M is an affordable brand, we feel like we won't benefit from it in a certain way. Maybe they might, they might sack or dismiss quite a lot of black people that actually work there. So we are scared about the consequences after effect. That's what I feel. However, that shouldn't be the main cause of us not taking any action of whatever happens. Because if we stand now and put our foot into anything we need to do, we need to, first of all, remember there are going to be consequences. But how do we deal with the consequences? It shouldn't be that we shouldn't be scared. We should have a hope and be strong as a unit, as a one. So once that happens, any of other things that want to fall in place, like the Gucci, for example, Mayweather, for example, they asked him, Mayweather, what do you think was happening about the Gucci situation is happening? And Mayweather goes, well, it's not affecting me. I've got the money. I'm going to buy it.
So my thing is really, the way I see it is, we have to, so I'm going to go off topic a bit, but I'll try to allude it back in. I think we're a bit hard on ourselves in terms of trying to get changed, only because in a relatively short space of time, remember, we are only second generation in this country. So I think like there's a bit of an identity crisis amongst us in the community, particularly African, in terms of the African community, because most of us came in late 80s, early 90s, bigger influx. And I think with the initial our parents coming over, the idea was that they were only just going to like study and go back to their relevant home countries. But as they've settled and they've had kids, we're starting to assimilate into society. Although we still hold on to that identity of Africa, actually, would we be classing ourselves as black British born people? And by that notion, I mean, actually, are we going to have a vested interest in the British way of life. So as black British people, therefore, we will start to look at things like politics, certain fields where maybe there is a lack of ethnic minorities, and because we have a vested interest in the country, like we're going to have kids here, we're going to grow up here, hardly people are going to go back. So therefore, because of that notion, we're definitely going to start taking accountable to drive change and ensuring that our voices are heard within the community.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be striving into certain areas of jobs, professions that probably in the past was never seen or heard of.
Yeah. And I think
yeah, go on. Sorry.
You're done.
Yeah.
And I think just to add to that, because we had Maz, when we had one of our guests on the show by the name of Maz, she mentioned one point regarding the whole disenfranchised when you look at the generation before us and why you have this situation in the first place, because she mentioned that generation, in regards to the mindset, as you touched on, was always going back to Africa to build. So in regards to the community, the sense of community, they didn't care about the community.
Yeah.
What about community? I'm going to work 2 jobs. I need to go and build my house over there. I'm not settling here. Yeah. And one thing that they fail to realize is that their children are growing up here. So if you don't care about the community, your child is affected by the community. So you should care about the community. Do you get what I mean? Mm-hmm. So obviously when you have that, and then it goes to that sense of identity regarding ourselves and what do we hold near to us. Mm-hmm. So one of it is that we are born here, or we've assimilated way better than the generation before us. We are in certain kind of streams where we have a bit more influence. I won't talk about power when it comes to black people, but I'll say all of us here have influence. We have influence to actually get someone a job. If we really wanted to, we could actually get that done, right? So we have influence to change stuff, which maybe the generation before us, it only got to a point where they start having influence to do that. So when you do have that, then you have this sense of identity. Then it's like the question that you raise, where you have that white person going to Africa to invest in shea butter to bring it to the Western world. And then people will be like, oh, why are we having like the Chinese going to Africa to invest? Why are we having like the Americans, or why are we having the Indians or something like that? What about us? Why are we not going to Africa to invest and bring these things over? Do you get what I mean? Mm-hmm. So a lot of the times we always talk about looking at it from the other side, but when we always tackle it from our side as well, what are we doing? And then it goes to the exact thing that you're saying, because that sense of identity, are we heavily just investing here to say that, you know what, I'm here, I'm not going to go to Africa, I don't care what goes on in Africa? Because then it's two kind of paradox, isn't it? One is that our parents are, you know what, I don't care what happens here, I'm more care about Africa. And then in our generation, do we say, I don't care what's going on in Africa, I'm more care about here, my community, and how my kids or the next generation is being affected by it? But then if we make whatever choice that we make, we always have to look on the other side and stop this kind of constant complaining. Of not that stop the complaining, don't get me wrong, because I always say that there are things that we all know the mechanisms in place that makes it a bit difficult for black people to maneuver, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not disputing that. But what I'm saying is, even when you're looking at the example of that shea butter, why do we not have our own doing that? Is it because of our sense of just the point that you touched on, what our priority is, whether it's here or whether it's back home?
Let me add to that. You mentioned, I heard you made a valid point, which is a good statement. But let me add to what you're saying. Why are we not going back that we are here within this Western world? And why is Asia, America, and UK, our Caucasians are going there and they're getting this benefit or whatsoever? It's not that we cannot go. Don't get me wrong. Let me let the audience understand that. It's because our government is so manipulative, do not help us, only have benefit for themselves. So, for example, I know I can go to Sierra Leone and start a business, have a tangible money and start a business and make that happen, make it work. But it wouldn't work if I don't have the government support. That means I have to have a government contract. But this Asian, this American, this United Kingdom, they can easily go in there and gain influence and give them money. And then the government can allow that because the government is benefit from them. This is the corruption part of it. That's why we can't go yet. That's one thing that... So before you can't go yet, You do what you need to do, you're necessary at the moment. You build up your portfolio, you build up what you need to do. When you have a certain things that you know you're going to do, you go back once in a while, then you can go back. Because I know I'm going to go back. That's an example. I know you're saying all of that, but I just wanted to touch on that side.
That's fine, but I think specifically on that example, for me, it's just layered with excuses. In the sense that, I'll tell you why it's layered with excuses. Sorry. I'll tell you why it's layered with excuses. Because the example that you've given is talking about China or America as a country. These are trade policies we're talking about here. Country-to-country dealing is something that we can't do.
It can be an individual as well.
No, but the individual dealings, there are people that are exporting shea butter. That shea butter is not with the government. That shea butter is with a farmer somewhere.
What I wanted to do is it will be involved in that kind of area. And then to able to do that, I will need at least a contract or something. I just can't go there and do that.
You see, the problem I have is that when we take the power from ourselves and we give the power to someone else, and then we say that we can't do something because someone is stopping us. And I totally disagree, because in some of these things that you're saying, whether it's in the hair industry, whether people are going to Ghana to bring palm oil, to bring yam, to bring plantain, whatever it is that they're doing, us as individuals could do the same thing. They don't have contracts with the government or anything like that to bring these things in. Mm-hmm. We can do it. Yeah? So I understand in certain field, maybe you want to open up a complex of construction work or whatever. No, you need a permission from the government. You might need land. All those I understand that. But when I'm not even going on those level of things, I'm talking about some of these streams that we talk about. Why do you go down Peckham and you walk into an Asian shop and they're selling you stuff from your own country? And then we say, oh, why are these Asians doing it? Why would they not do it? These are things that I feel like we individually could do something about. So the question I ask is, if on one hand we are not doing anything about it, why do we then sit there and complain to talk about these things?
My question is...
It makes us feel good.
No,
yes.
No. But wait. Are we lazy? Is that a question?
No.
Perspectives, different views, one voice.
Something I wanted to touch on in terms of laziness, because I know I will 100% say I'm guilty of being lazy. There's certain things that I've just thought, I can't be bothered or whatever. But then I think it's more identifying the lazy side, and then you can move forward and think, you know what, let me actually do something about it and do this.
So just saying that, because this is the stuff that I have when we're looking at some of these situations, us actually taking ownership. Yeah. So once you start taking ownership, first question is, are we lazy? I don't think we're lazy. I don't think that should ever be the part of that conversation, because that's something that's always laid against black people being lazy and stuff like that.
I don't mean that generally, though.
Yeah. The second part is priority. Yeah. Just like what Edward mentioned. What is our priority? Because if we know what our priority is in regards to our actions will generally show what we want to do. And I use the example of the generation before us. Like my mom's priority is to build something in Africa and go home and settle. That's what her priority is. Her actions show that. There's nothing in her actions that will not show that this is not a woman that wants to go settle in Africa. But then the problem that generations start having is that when they start getting to that pension age, it's hard for them to go. Because when they go, they need to have some sort of income to sustain whatever lifestyle that they have there. So you end up having people that have invested heavily in a certain country, build houses and stuff, but they never get to enjoy to live in those houses. Other people live in those houses for them. I think for us, when we're looking at our priorities are scattered around the place. Everyone is looking at themselves to say what is suited for me. So we don't have that collective kind of thinking. Plus, that collective kind of thinking is not easy to actually not sustain, but to have in the first place. Because that collective kind of thinking is, first of all, looking at the African collective kind of thinking, then you add in the Afro-Caribbean kind of collective kind of thinking, because that's what we have in this UK.
And this is why I said there's a bit of an identity crisis, because if we don't class ourselves, so for example, if a group of our generation says, do you know what, I don't have any vested interest in Africa or the Caribbean, I identify myself as black British, therefore, I have a vested interest in the way of life in Britain, which means that my economic resources, any political influence that I may have, whether it's job market or even the little influence you have, you will start to invest time in that, and through that you will develop a structure within that community. And therefore you'll be able to just overall influence change and develop a community sort of thing. Yeah.
Ideology.
Yeah. So it's like what I was touching on with Kojo yesterday, in terms of, I can see that a black middle class is building slowly but surely in this country, and through that you will start to see certain changes that maybe it might take another 30 years, or our kids, if they obviously, I'm assuming most of our kids will probably stay here, and they will have a vested interest in the country and try to do things that we probably didn't do in our time, and you'll start to see changes like that. I don't think I'm articulating it properly, but yeah,
it makes sense, because
and that's what I'm talking about.
This is the stuff. So this is the shift of Africa now. Africa now looking at their diaspora to say that black people in the diaspora, we could actually actively source income from that directive, in the sense that people are looking for a sense of identity, and that's example of what Ghana did with the Year of Return. Giving them that sense of identity means that you're creating some sort of tourism, but then you're also giving a collective kind of thinking that now there's some sort of, whatever you want to call it, underground, but there is a movement in America in regards to their heritage and where they are from. Now, if you're shifting those minds to Africa, then you are going to create jobs in Africa by black Americans that are going to Africa. It's just simple as that. So it's all about that prioritization and that shifting of mind. So we are here now, and we ask ourselves, where are we in regards to this whole paradigm? Because it's not a one answer fits all. It's a bit difficult, definitely, because of we come from children of migrants, and then we some of us think that we're Ghanaian, some of us think we're Nigerian, some of us think we're British. What does that mean if I think I'm Ghanaian living in the UK? What does that mean? Do you know what I mean? And these are the kind of conversations that we kind of really need to bottom out to then know where the focus is, because our focus is all over the place at the moment, I feel.
What I mean by the terms of laziness is just a conjunction to our priority, what you guys are touched on. I didn't mean like laziness, like it's just not doing anything or physical or anything like that. It's just towards that. So that's what I just wanted to touch on.
Yeah, because I think, people talk so much about different countries. People will talk about the Congo, they'll talk about what is going on. But I think sometimes as well, is it not fear of actually just saying it how it is? Yeah, and I say fear in the sense of, when we want to bring change, how does one bring change? All the people in this world that have actually brought change, what has happened? Action. Like, when you want to bring change, does fear not just come along with that change?
It would come along with that change. And I think a lot of people, as human beings, we always wait for the big bang. But when you look at history, it's always been incremental change. And ultimately, if our ancestors didn't do what they did in the past, we won't be where we are now in terms of, and it's just about just trying to keep with that incremental change, however small it is. Like, for your example, you touch on, like, some of us are in jobs where we could influence the next generation and show them, actually, maybe you never thought about this career path, and to see someone that looks like you in that sort of profession, and you'll be able to be a mentor to them, and you're able to guide them and say, okay, cool, this is what I did, these are the mistakes that I've made, you can learn from it, and through that, it
you know what?
It carries on.
It does, but I'm just in relation to being accountable.
So I guess my thing is being accountable to yourself, but knowing that whatever you do has to be for the greater good of the community. So not just being selfish. Don't be accountable for yourself and just be selfish, but actually know that actually whatever I'm doing, what I envisage is to help the community out, to be wider. That's the way I see it.
I mean, going through this whole conversation, I've now come to the definition of accountability as the ability to reflect and accept your responsibility to that situation. So
I like that.
If it is a situation of crime or whatever, blah, blah, how can I reflect and accept my responsibility to that situation? That's the conclusion I've come to.
Yeah.
No, I definitely agree with you, Mo. I think it's such a broad topic. You can't even really. There's no one size fits all solution. In terms of like accountability, And as I said, I'm definitely have mixed feelings about it. I think what is definitely key, as you touched on, Edward, that you can't be driven by self-interest. Has to be something more there. That I guess that can be difficult for some people, especially if you set yourself certain goals and ambitions, and those goals and ambitions are driven by self-interest, and that's what necessarily keeps you going. Some people can be completely blind to what's going on into the community because they're completely driven by their own self-interest. Yeah. And how do you get those people to become much more invested in the community? That's my question here, and I guess it's difficult. It is a difficult thing to sort of. It's difficult to find a solution that completely, works.
Yeah,
I think this touches on the conversation we had. As in, I'm black and I voted Conservatives. This is exactly around that conversation, because the author Diana Young was making certain valuable points based on her situation and how those kind of like policies that Conservatives are making will benefit her.
So I totally agree. I mean, with Cam, that it is a wider, and I'm sure we'll probably touch on this topic again in the future.
In a different
kind of context as well. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the LDN Perspective podcast. Please get in contact with us. We want to create more of an organic platform. So if you have any questions, please check our Instagram page, which is LDN Perspective. You could also reach us on Twitter, Perspective LDN. And please, you could always drop us an email at ldnperspective@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.
Perspectives, different views, one voice.